I'm Sarah Maslin Nir of the New York Times, sitting in for Sam Roberts. Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, we talk with the Times' London-based breaking news hub about Europe's dangerous summer heat, and also with the New York Times Magazine about its striking visual Everyday Founders project, reimagining the American Revolution. But first, Taylor Swift's plans for the 4th of July weekend in New York have turned into one of the biggest summer mysteries, with reporting pointing to Madison Square Garden as the center of a multi-day celebration. Online, fans are treating it like a slow-burn wedding reveal, parsing permits, bookings, and clues about what is coming to Midtown. Madison Malone Kircher is an internet culture reporter for the New York Times, and she joins us now. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Madison, what is going to happen in Madison Square Garden? Does anyone know? Do you know?
Welcome to Taylor Swift's New York. It's been waiting for you. Yes, we have a loose idea of some things that may be happening this weekend, which is to say that's a lot more than we knew even a few months ago, right? The couple has been extremely tight-lipped since their engagement about this wedding. And earlier this month, the Times published a piece sort of delving into what we do know. So we know that there will be some sort of event, multi-day event on July 2nd and July 3rd at the iconic Madison Square Garden.
What a venue.
What, right? You couldn't name a bigger venue for...
I mean, they both live in stadiums, right? It
exactly.
Makes sense.
It feels right. It feels correct for them. You know, you've got great security, great stages. She loves New York, and they were just here. Why not? So we know we're going to have events on July 2nd, July 3rd. Our understanding is that the July 2nd event will be a more intimate gathering of about 100 people. And then the 3rd is an event with up to about 1,000 people. We've seen permits for load-in that put that anywhere from 500 to 999 folks. I called that production company, and they said, "We are under NDA, no comment."
But we love when they tell us they're under NDA.
Yeah, I did go, huh, interesting.
They could have just hung up.
Yes.
So I love these granular, how did the reporting come about?
Yeah.
Because it's not just like somebody called you and said, hey, Taylor Swift's doing X. Talk to me, it was a multi-reporter struggle to get this story.
Yeah, it's, as somebody who covers Taylor Swift for the paper quite frequently and has been working on stories about this wedding since I wrote the story for us on the engagement, which I had pre-written weeks and months in advance and was just waiting to hit the button the day the Instagram post dropped. It was really incredible to see all of my colleagues on this story come together, you know, reporting from City Hall, reporting from sources within the NYPD, reporting from sources within the entertainment industry, within MSG, which is why if you happen to read that story, you'll note there's a lot of names on it. This was really like a full court, full team effort.
Yeah.
Those are basketball metaphors, I think.
No,
apologies
terrific.
to Knicks fan Taylor Swift.
You did great. So we have evidence of a permit. I think we even had some Amtrak workers underneath.
Yes,
the
Amtrak police have been told to prepare like it will be Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding this weekend.
And people walk the beat and talk to Amtrak police? That's how that went down?
Yeah. Definitely. We've got colleagues, we've got colleagues who know, everybody knows a guy. We also, coming out of Pennsylvania, have reporting that says we've seen people who work for Taylor Swift at a facility in Lancaster that builds stages for concerts, for performances, and we do believe there is the potential for some sort of performances to be happening at this Friday event.
So we have to also play devil's advocate here.
Yes.
Maybe this is a big ruse. She has a history of this, right?
She loves a secret. She loves an Easter egg. She loves a secret code. I mean, Taylor Swift is a person who, at one point several years ago, there was a rumor that many fans believe that she was being transported in and out of buildings in a suitcase.
Got it.
Just sort of like folded up. So this is a person who people believe will go to great lengths to conceal things. That said, I feel pretty confident in my colleagues and my reporting that something is happening this weekend. And at this point, there are so many different folks engaged around the city, right? You have City Hall, you have the NYPD. It wouldn't be a great PR look for this couple if it turned out to have just been, oh, we filed the permits as a feint, we're getting married in Mallorca.
Yeah, for funsies. However, maybe it's something else. I mean, she loves throwing a 4th of July party. Talk to me about that.
She does. Tay America. So Taylor Swift owns this cottage gigantic home looking over the sea in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. I was there a few weekends ago, not at the house, just sort of staring through the fences, where she has been known to throw very star-studded 4th of July parties, you know, red, white, and blue bikinis, the whole work. She really likes this holiday. So there was some precedent for this being a weekend that's sort of important to her. And also, you know, she's Miss Americana, as the documentary goes. It doesn't feel like a far stretch for Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce to get married on the 4th of July.
But you were up in Rhode Island because of a bad tip.
Yeah, I was. So there was a rumor that circulated for much of the early portion of the year that Taylor Swift would be married June 13th. 13 is her lucky number. She was born on December 13th. She used to perform with the number painted on her hand, a lot of numerology among Swifties, that she would be married on June 13th at a hotel very near her home in Rhode Island. And that made sense to a lot of fans. And frankly, it didn't seem unbelievable to me, right? It's a beautiful location. She's got history there. It's a highly secure home she owns. Beachfront wedding in June. This all sounds good. Worked with Travis's off-season schedule. So I spent the weekend in Watch Hill. There was no wedding, but what I did meet was just a slew of really lovely Swifties, often mothers and daughters, sisters, lots of women of all ages who had come just to sort of breathe the same sea air that Taylor Swift breathes and wander the town and see the sights she's sung about. And well, they were bummed not to see even, you know, the whisper of a veil. It was actually a very heartwarming weekend. And I imagine we might see something similar to that this weekend in New York City.
Well, I've been to numerous celebrity events, but always on the outskirts. You know, that's the reporter's fate. And I often think the conversations there are more powerful than the ones you might have with the celebrities. I once covered Whitney Houston's funeral from a coffee shop far outside of where she was being buried. And I met a woman whose daughters were named Whitney and Elizabeth, and, you know, people that these artists have spoken to. And actually, in my estimation, they belonged right there at the funeral side, you know, paying their respects. And I wonder if Taylor Swift would ever have a fan join her at her wedding.
I don't know. There's been some speculation about that because Taylor Swift, over the years, has let fans in some ways. She used to hold these events called secret sessions where she would tap super fans online and invite them to a home of hers to listen to an album early. She used to read people's Tumblrs, fans' internet presences, and then send hyper-curated care packages with hand-painted watercolors. This is someone who loves her fans. And so I think as her star has grown and her safety has become a much bigger concern than it was in those early days, she's had to sort of change how she interacts with the fans. But I do think she'll have to give them something. I hope.
Well, you know, Taylor, if you're watching, you know, I'm free the 3rd.
The 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, I canceled all my plans.
I'm open. I'll bring my notebook, unfortunately for you, but, well, this sounds really interesting. How are you going to be spending the 4th of July weekend? Not watching fireworks, I guess.
I mean, I suppose if I can see the fireworks from the 10-block radius around Madison Square Garden, then I'll be able to take them in, but I will be hanging out in Midtown Manhattan talking to anybody who will talk to me.
Well, there's a little bit of a tension here, right? The 4th of July weekend is Trump's big moment, the 250th anniversary, which we spoke about on the show, and now Taylor sort of taking the air out of the room. They are antagonists with each other. Is there any intentionality here that you see?
I don't know that there's intentionality, but it's certainly something that fans have been commenting on, right? We have these two American powerhouses, two American powerhouse entertainers, really. They both come from the same world. Donald Trump, of course, now president of the United States. And, you know, they have a longstanding beef. I think it was in 2024 that Trump tweeted in all caps, "I hate Taylor Swift." She usually goes a bit more subtle, registering voters, speaking out politically from time to time. But it's certainly a clash. And I think fans are noticing that they're hearing a lot more about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding than they are necessarily about America 250. And the thing that they're saying to me is, she doesn't care. She's somewhere right now trying on a beautiful Dior dress, or maybe, and planning for this beautiful life event. Whereas Donald Trump, based on his social media, you know, commentary in the past about her, might be a person who will get a comment from about Taylor Swift throwing her wedding on his big weekend.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope that it's fruitful for you. I hope our hunches are correct. And if not, I know you'll be staking out the next possible wedding.
Drinking a lot of water. Thanks so much.
Sure. Coming up, how Europe's extreme heat became breaking global news. With much of Europe facing dangerous, record-breaking heat this summer, we're joined by Isabella Kwai, a New York Times reporter based in London who covers breaking news and trends across Europe and beyond. Welcome, Isabella, not only are you reporting on this, you're living this. Talk to me about your last week in London.
Yes, thanks for having me, Sarah. So it's been really hot. Most of us, living in the UK, living in Europe, look forward to summer every year. It typically signals the end of darkness, later sunsets. But for the past 3 decades, Europe has also been warming faster than any other continent. And we really felt this last week with a wave of heat that broke temperature records in Britain for June and in a lot of other countries as well. And so it just felt stifling. I was lucky enough to work from home for a couple of days, but even that's not a respite because many of the buildings don't have AC. And so people were doing anything to try and get some air to cool down. But it was difficult to find that in the city last week.
I've been reading about the sort of culture wars surrounding air conditioning, particularly in France, that it's become a left and a right issue, that the right wants AC and the left says it's the contributor to climate change. I mean, are people rushing to get air conditioning? Like, how are people combating the heat all over Europe right now?
Yes, at least where I live in the UK, portable air conditioning units, which are a clear answer to quickly cooling down your house, were sold out in a lot of places from a lot of retailers online. And yes, in some countries, there is this ideological conversation that is happening over air conditioning, but a lot of people I've interviewed, simply just want to find a solution to something that they worry about. Heat has been deadly in France in the last week. People have died. There's, I think, some statistics are coming out, something in excess of 1,000 deaths just in this past week for heat waves. And people are dying from going swimming, and perhaps not having the skills or expertise or knowledge to know how to handle themselves in that situation. So I think beyond the culture war, there's a very practical question of how are people going to get through these summers if they continue to be as hot and do it safely?
Can you talk about some of the extremes that have been seen? I think there's records being broken everywhere. 40 degrees Celsius in parts of Spain. I think, am I correct? That's 104 Fahrenheit? Or is that, I think I saw even 107. Can you talk to me about what places are pressure points?
Certainly in Spain, there's been warnings of places over 100 degrees. Spain, countries in Southern Europe are often at risk for things like wildfires. In Britain, it was 36 degrees Celsius, which is also, I think, around something over 96 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the hottest temperature recorded, in June. And then you had a lot of high heat warnings, the highest level in Italy, in France, Germany, Switzerland. And so it's not just the countries that we think of as at risk of hot temperatures, but places that you might think are cooler in the summer. And so all of them are also seeing temperature records broken.
Well, I saw in France that the Gay Pride Parade was canceled because of the heat advisory, and some people moved it indoors to the Printemps shopping mall. They were trying to celebrate there because it was one of the few refuges with cold spaces. Are traditions being upended here? Are ways of life being impacted by this?
They definitely are. People are afraid to go outside in the middle of the day. A few years ago, I reported on some older women in Switzerland who actually filed a lawsuit against their government because they said that heat waves were threatening their health and it was a human rights issue.
Wow.
And that was a few years ago. And just this last week, I was doing some reporting around watering holes in London because I was interested in the question of how people in a landlocked city are going to cool down. And, you have people venturing to areas where they might not be allowed to swim legally, but they are willing to do so just to cool down. I spoke to a woman who told me that she booked a hotel room with air conditioning because her apartment was simply too hot and she hadn't slept in 3 days.
Oh, wow.
So it runs the gamut. You also have things like train tracks buckling. people going to museums to just shelter. And officials are thinking through various ways. They're aware that heat waves are a problem here. So, they're treating it more like a natural disaster and have, things like cooling centers and have people checking in on elderly and more vulnerable citizens. But ultimately, I think there will be a bigger shift that needs to happen over the next few years.
Because we're just in June now, and also this isn't this year's problem, right? I think you said Europe is the place that's warming up most swiftly in the entire planet. I was reading Spain, a couple decades ago, had about 30 days above 90 before, and now it's 60% of its summer days are above 90. I mean, this seems like it's going to persist and needs to be tackled. What's the best or biggest or loudest solution you're hearing right now, or is there any?
I think that there are a few conversations happening at the same time. There are governmental efforts, certainly conversations happening about how to address things like emissions. There are grassroots efforts like the ones that I mentioned, where citizens are taking matters into their own hands to try and put pressure on governments to act. But a lot of the immediate efforts have to do with the practicalities of how to alert people and stay safe during heat waves. So changing the infrastructure. I mean, whether or not, all buildings will suddenly have air conditioning here remains to be seen. But I certainly think people have told me, at least, that they're aware of it, and, they want their governments to help them stay cool. Metro lines and getting around safely in the heat. I've heard a lot more warnings from the government and practical advice on how to stay cool and stay hydrated than might have been given in previous years. But I think there are a lot of different levers that can be pulled to try and address the issue. But ultimately, the bigger problem isn't going to go away. We see climate change, according to researchers, being the main driver of these heat waves. And so we can only expect them to continue to be as hot and as intense and more frequent.
Well, Isabella, thank you so much. I hope you are taking some of this advice and staying hydrated, or at least cool, in the office. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
From extreme weather to a bold new take on America's founding 250 years ago, the New York Times Magazine is asking 7 leading historians to retell the era through everyday founders, using striking, contemporary visual storytelling to pull their lives into the present. It immediately caught our attention, and we wanted to hear how it came to life. The magazine's editor-in-chief, Jake Silverstein, joins me now. Welcome, Jake.
Hi, good to be here.
So this was a tremendous undertaking for the magazine, rivaling the 250th years that it has undertaken to make America, America. But seriously, it's massive, it's awesome. Tell me how it came about and spell it out for people who are maybe watching this and going to turn to it after.
Yeah, sure. We started working on this project maybe 2 or 3 years ago, so it's a long time in the making. I think, like a lot of people, we understood that the semi-quincentennial, there's various terms for this 250th anniversary, but this anniversary was going to be a big deal. It was going to be a moment to kind of take stock of the country, of its history, of its present, and in particular of how its history gets told. And that's what we wanted to focus on. We were intrigued by the idea that, every 50 years, there's a pretty important anniversary celebration of this date, of July 4th, 1776. And the last one was the bicentennial. And the way that we tell history, the way that scholars research history, has changed a lot in those 50 years. And that's what we wanted to focus on. In fact, the changes in the last, between the bicentennial and today, are perhaps greater than at any previous 50-year point in the various anniversaries of the revolution. And so we wanted to try to highlight the way that the telling of American history has changed in the last 50 years.
And one of the pieces in the work is by Jane Kamensky. She's not just a historian, she's the president of Monticello, the estate of Thomas Jefferson, and talking about a person who our understanding of this man has changed from, carving him in effigy to really looking at him as a person who kept enslaved people quite hypocritically. But how are you unpacking and unpicking these stories? You have many different versions of this.
Yeah, well, Jane, it was interesting to have Jane, who has worked in a lot of different modes as a historian, as and a public intellectual, somebody who is really expert in thinking through the uses of history, and who now is in this public history role, running the foundation that is in some ways trying to preserve and engage people with Thomas Jefferson's legacy, who he was, what Monticello was all about. If you go there, you really get a kind of feel for the person. So to have Jane, who is responsible for that in her current role, but who is obviously, just as I said, deeply expert in the way that, as I was saying earlier, history has changed in the last 50 years, to have her introducing the project, helping readers understand that, as the project shows, there are so many different and new perspectives that are beyond those of the so-called founding fathers, that are now such an important part of how we tell this history, but that they have to kind of share the stage with major founders like Thomas Jefferson. And that's a difficult thing to do. As I said, one of the big changes in the history in the last 50 years is that historians and the public too are trying to figure out how to put these two types of people together. How do you have your, George Washington, your John Adams, your Thomas Jefferson, your James Madison, your traditional founding fathers with capital Fs. How do you have them on the same stage as the legions of people whose names most of our readers have never heard of before, who played their own role in that period and in the success of the revolution?
I like Jane calls them small f founders. Can you talk us through these everyday founders? You had people as different from an Oneida leader, an enslaved woman who sued for her freedom, to a common soldier. Can you give us, in the few minutes we have, a taste of some of these everyday founders?
Yeah, look, we chose these 7 in part because we worked with 7 historians who we brought into this project, and we asked them, who do you want to write about? Who would you nominate? The truth is that obviously the whole nature of this project is that we could have picked 7 other founders. These people are interesting, they're important, they had a role to play, they had an important role to play. But in some ways, the point of the project is that there were dozens more, hundreds more, thousands more. Jane had a sort of provocative notion, which is sort of threaded into her essay, which is that anybody who was essentially alive and part of the experiment at the time of the founding could be called a founder. But the specific 7 that we chose, also we were trying to kind of capture different aspects of colonial society, and each of them do that. And you mentioned people like Joseph Plum Martin, a teenage soldier who has one of the only diaries of what it was actually like to be as a soldier, as a common soldier. And it's very eye-opening what the historian Alan Taylor writes about in Martin's chapter in this project. Shows you in some ways how abominable the treatment of common soldiers by the officer class was at certain parts of that struggle. And I think that helps remind people that though the ideals of the revolution were unifying in some ways to the people who were fighting for them, it's not correct to think that colonial society was all rowing in the exact same direction. There was a tremendous amount of struggle within the people who were fighting for the revolution, and it's always important to remember that. History is always more complicated than it tends to be in the telling many, many years, in this case 250 later.
Well, one of the fascinating ways that you do this telling is with a really interesting visual medium. It's almost anime. Talk to me about that process.
Yeah, in some ways that became one of the major signatures of this project. Even beyond the concept of the 7 everyday founders, was that we were going to use illustration to tell in a visual and immersive, hopefully kind of cinematic way, the stories of these 7 people. And the reason for that, this is the story of the revolution is told and retold and retold and retold. Just so many different versions of this exist. And so as you come to it, trying to do, hopefully modestly your own fresh take on it, you want to try to come up with a way to engage readers with a story that's familiar. And our thought here, in addition to telling it from these different perspectives, was to tell it visually. I think that that's an important mode here, in part because the perspectives are new and unfamiliar to readers. We want them to be transported. We want them to feel immersed. And visuals do that in a way that text cannot. Obviously, these immersive visual moments that we have then give way to essays by these historians in which they're working analytically to explain the past. But the introductions, the visual introductions to each of these characters, they really put you in the place. And they start to activate your imagination. And I think that's what's exciting about this project, is that you start to you see a scene and you can pick out a detail that's meaningful to you, and you can sort of imagine your way into it. And that's the most exciting thing about the past, right? Is when we can have these moments, and it's hard, honestly, sometimes hard to have them when you're reading a dry history text, to find your way into that experience, that moment, that historical period, and sort of see what it was like to be in the corner of the frame or to be at the edge of the crowd or something like that. Imagine what you would have done in that situation. And in a way, that was what we hoped the visual aspect of this project would be.
Sorry to interrupt. I got a little excited because it's so visual. It's so gorgeous. I mean, are we thinking of a book that's going to be coming out from this?
Well, of course, it will be coming out. It's not exactly a hardcover book, but it will be coming out as a print magazine this coming weekend. It's the last 4th weekend.
Oh,
anybody
nice.
can pick that up. You can pick that up with their Sunday New York Times. But yeah, I mean, we do imagine, and we kept talking about it as we were working on this project, as if it were essentially like a season of episodic, an episodic Netflix show about the revolution, where you're kind of going through each one, and it was kind of a joke, but we did imagine it in that way. It's sort of storytelling with the visuals taking a center stage.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to what you produce in the next 50-year iteration at the Tricentennial, and I'll pick this up on July 4th weekend. Thank you so much, Jake.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's it for our show. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sarah Maslin Nir. If you've enjoyed these conversations and want to support more programs like this, please consider donating at the link on your screen. Thank you for watching.